Hey folks, welcome back to the Western Southerner YouTube channel. Today I'm going to talk to you about how to find campsites if you're on a road trip out west. Folks, if you like these videos, please hit like and subscribe. Hey folks, so it's the winter time, I just got a little cabin fever and you're probably thinking about getting out west to do a road trip. So I'll kind of go through three things. I'll talk a little bit about finding campsites in the winter time, which is tricky. Then I'll talk a little bit about the different kinds of public land designations, which can be beneficial. And then last piece, I made a list of kind of 10 little pointers or kind of tips and tricks to keep in mind if you're going to do like dispersed camping, or even if you're going to, go into like an established bay campground. Okay, so to start off, if you're out west, you have to keep in mind that there is a lot of snow and a lot of the public land out west is under snow right now. The road's covered in snow. Snow might be a foot deep. It might be 4 feet deep. Now, there's kind of a few places you can go that are less likely to have, big piles of snow or really deep snow or really deep drifts. So one of the places that might have some accessibility in the wintertime for like an RV camper, or just kind of truck camper or tent camping, would be certain areas of high desert. Sometimes the high desert land is in like a rain shadow and it doesn't get a whole lot of snow. Other times, you go out to eastern Wyoming and there's snow drifts are 12 feet deep, right? So you gotta kind of play it by ear to explore a little bit. I'm thinking of places maybe in like eastern Oregon, southern Idaho, southern Colorado, like in between the mountains in Utah, northern New Mexico. There's some high desert out there and there's a lot of roads and things in that area. And a lot of times those places have places where you can camp out. You can pull a big RV into it and you'll likely be able to find a place to camp. So the other place that might have some camping in the wintertime out west is along big rivers. Naturally, like big rivers are lower down, so, lower elevation out west a lot of times means less snow. So that's one thing. And then bigger rivers will oftentimes have, boat ramps or campsites or pull offs or things like that that you might be able to camp in. I'm thinking places like, Madison River, Big Hole River, Montana, maybe the Rio Grande in Colorado, maybe the Arkansas, maybe the Salmon River in Idaho, maybe the McKenzie or the Rogue in Oregon, Conejos, some rivers in New Mexico and Utah, obviously. Might be a place to camp along those rivers. I like camping on rivers, even if the fishing's no good or if it's really cold. I like the sound of the water. I like being near the water. Just kind of, makes for a good camping experience, in my opinion. All right, so moving on. When it comes to public land, there's different designations of public land, right? And so knowing what those designations are and knowing kind of how they operate can be really helpful, I think. First designation is like national parks. This is your Yellowstones, your Yosemites, and usually camping there is pay camping and it's booked out months in advance, right? And so I've rarely, if ever, camped in a national park. Maybe there's some places that have first come first serve camping, but usually it's pretty booked. It's not a great camping experience. People going to a national park aren't necessarily there for the camping. They're there to experience the beautiful surroundings and the natural resources that national park is protecting. So the other piece is state forest land. Some places might have camping on state forest land, but I haven't experienced a whole lot of that. So national parks and state forests, generally, I don't really mess with when it comes to trying to camp out. Okay, the next piece is what's called national forest. And there is tons and tons of national forest land. The national forest is managed by the Department of Agriculture, unlike the national parks, they're managed by the Department of Interior. And so, national forests are huge. There's lots of roads going in. There might be some logging, they might be, harvesting timber or whatever, but technically that's what national forests are for. So we have to recognize that that's kind of their point. But thankfully we can utilize them for like hunting and fishing and camping and doing all kinds of cool outdoor stuff as well. I'm a big fan of camping in national forests. Oftentimes there is pay camping. That can be anywhere from like, $5 to $25, depending on the location and the demand. There will oftentimes be a lot of what's called dispersed camping. And dispersed camping is when you just drive down a dirt road and roll in somewhere, and maybe there's a big kind of cleared area and you can camp there. A lot of times they might have like a limit, or they have some restrictions, but in general, dispersed camping is pretty awesome. It might be crowded, there might be other people there, right? So you have to work around that. But it's not like there's campsite number 14, campsite number 15. This is your fire pit. This is that. It's usually a little bit more spread out, and you just kind of figure it out on your own. Some of these sites have pit toilets. Some might have established plumbing and like real, bathrooms in them. But in general, they're usually pretty rustic. Okay, so the national forests are generally kind of like in like the mountains, but then there's all this other public land outside of the mountains, and that's called Bureau of Land Management, or BLM land. And BLM land is just, a lot of what people might call like, desert or wasteland or high desert. There's not a lot going on, or it doesn't seem like there's a lot going on there. There's tons of wildlife. There's all kinds of stuff happening, but it just looks kind of like barren. There's a lot of sage. There's not a whole lot happening a lot of times on BLM land. Oftentimes, though, there's a lot of roads going in. There's a lot of places to camp, and there's a lot of pluses to camping on BLM land. I feel like oftentimes BLM land is lower elevation. So if you're in a place with a lot of snow, like I said earlier, there's going to be less snow in BLM. And if you're dragging like a giant travel trailer, that could be a good thing. I don't know if there's more BLM land or more national forest land in the country, but there's a whole lot of BLM. You can look at an online app or a map and figure out what's BLM fairly easily. A lot of the same rules that apply to national forests apply to BLM. Oftentimes, in my experience, BLM has even less amenities than what a national forest would have. You know, it's not really likely that they'll have like a pit toilet or things along those lines. It's a kind of a flat spot out in the middle of nowhere. Okay, the last thing I'll talk about is land that's managed by Fish and Game or Department of Natural Resources. These are the organizations that kind of like give out hunting and fishing licenses. A lot of times I've found places to camp at boat ramps on rivers. And so, I mean, that's great for me because I do a lot of like fishing and boating. And if I can camp out on the river that I'm going to fish at, sign me up. That's the best thing ever. So finding these sites is a little bit more tricky than finding like a national forest site or maybe a BLM site. But if you're on like a river, it's worth checking out to see if there's some, a state managed put in or boat ramp where that might have some camping there as well. So, okay, last thing is I've got this list of 10 things I thought of when it comes to trying to find a place to camp on public land. First thing is carry a road atlas, kind of one of those big like gazetteer, maybe Delorme I think makes one. I think I've got one for probably half the states in the country. You can flip through that big map. You can see Forest Service roads. You can see if you're in public land or not. Obviously, it has campsites on it, but the Forest Service roads and that is really handy because if there's a Forest Service road that's open, there's probably a place to camp on that Forest Service road, unless it's an area that gets so much traffic that they kind of like really narrow down the camping opportunity. I always carry one of those gazetteers. Number two, keep a little bit of cash in hand. If you're going to camp in a national forest campsite, a lot of times they do cost money. You fill the little envelope out, and then you put it in the big metal post or whatever. And having some cash on hand is really handy, particularly having small bills, because sometimes the campsites are like $8. They're not just like 5, 10, 15, 20. Number three, so if you've been out west, you'll know what this is. If not, you might not know. But there, particularly in the spring, there's this crazy mud season that happens in a lot of places out west, mainly in kind of the high desert areas. And this mud is just this sticky, icky, loamy goo that's like sticks to your tires. And it is easy to get stuck in this mud. I mean, even if you have a big truck, this mud is really tricky. So, you want to watch out for that stuff. I feel like it's the worst when the snow is melting in the spring. That might be on into May or even June, depending on what part of the country you're in. So you want to watch out for that mud. And if it looks like it's that really sticky mud, it's piling up on your tires, you probably just want to stay out of there. It's not going to be any fun to hang out in it anyway. Number four is really important. When you pull into a campground, dispersed camping, whatever it may be, you don't want to park your car in tall grass, particularly tall, dead, dry grass, because that grass will get up into the exhaust system and it can potentially catch on fire. And you can start a grass fire really quickly, especially in the summertime. So burn your vehicle up, burn your trailer up, start a grass fire out west. That's the last thing we need. All right, number five, sometimes there's like there is a limit on how many days you can camp. Some places it's like 14 days. So, 2 weeks in one spot. That's pretty darn good if you ask me. You might have to do a little bit of research because sometimes you have to go like 10 miles away or something technically. Often is a limit on how long you can stay at a place. All right, number six. Obviously, having a four-wheel drive is great. If you're going to be running around out west, you almost absolutely have to have it. If you don't have one, though, sometimes if you can wait for the ground to freeze, even into June, right? The ground, probably freezes at night oftentimes. You can wait for the ground to freeze. You can get into some places that you otherwise wouldn't be able to get into. Now you have to be careful because if you go into it when it's frozen, that means you got to come out when it's frozen also. So just something to keep in mind. All right, number seven, always leave the gate how you found it. If the gate's open, leave it open. If the gate's closed, leave it closed. More than once, I've woken up and had like cows, licking the side of my truck camper. Or you could let somebody's cows out, and that'd be a real nightmare. All right, number eight, sometimes, especially in the high desert, it can just be super, super windy out there, right? So that's something to keep in mind. If you can find some trees, you can find land features, maybe, park in a gully, the wind can significantly kind of be dampened, but, sometimes it can be extremely windy, again, especially in the spring and in the fall. All right, number nine, if you have questions about a location, you think there might be a campsite, but you're not quite sure, you want to pull your rig in, just walk it out, scout it out. A lot of times, if there's going to be a place to camp, it's not going to be that far in of a walk. If there's not a place to camp, there might be a long, long way before you can turn around, or you might not be able to turn around at all. You might end up in a situation where you're like having to back out. Maybe you got to call somebody and get towed out or something. So if you don't know, walk it out, scout it out, just to get a good idea before you pull in somewhere, especially with the big trailer. All right, and number 10, the orientation in which you park can have a bearing on how comfortable your living situation is. What I mean by that is that, say you have this long trailer and you park it broadside south facing to the sun, it's just going to be hotter in there. You have to keep in mind out west, the sun and the shade, there's just a tremendous difference between the temperatures that happen there. So, you might not want to park in the shade if it's the winter or the early spring. You might want to park in the sun broadside. So the orientation of your camper or your tent or your truck camper to the sun can have a real bearing on how comfortable it is. Hey folks, I hope this is helpful. I hope this helps your travels. And if you like this video, hit like and subscribe. Take care.